child labor, unethical promotion, manipulating uneducated mothers, pollution, price fixing, and mislabeling. Those are not words that you want to see associated with your company. Nestle is the world's largest foodstuff company, and it has a history that would make even hardcore industrialists shiver. People love to hate, and they really love to hate on big companies, whether or not they have a reason to. Large companies are the very backbone of our economy, and they often get a bad rep for little or no reason. But sometimes there is a reason, or as in this case, several solid reasons, as we'll see. We're going to look at why Nestle has had such a bad reputation and whether or not it deserves it. Nestle is a Swiss multinational food and beverage company. According to Wikipedia, their products include baby food, bottled water, breakfast cereals, coffee and tea, confectionery, dairy products, ice cream, frozen food, pet foods, and snacks. 29 of their brands have sales of over $1 billion a year and have over 8,000 brands. They have 447 factories across 194 countries and employ around 333,000 people. Nestle truly are what you would call a giant. They're also considered to be one of the best employers in Europe, with 6 LEED certifications and sponsor numerous activities and sustainable projects. Looking at only these stats, it would seem that Nestle is one of the good guys, but then why are they so hated? Let's take it step by step. First up, the baby formula and boycott. We're in the 90s, and this is a sad story about poverty, breastfeeding, and greed. Nestle aggressively pushed their breastfeeding formula in less economically developed countries, specifically targeting the poor. They made it seem that their infant formula was almost as good as a mother's milk, which is highly unethical for several reasons. The first problem was the need for water sanitation. Most of the groups they were targeting, especially in Africa, didn't have access to clean water. Many don't to this day, so it was necessary for them to boil the water. But due to low literacy rates, many mothers were not aware of this, so they mixed the formula with polluted water, which put the children at great risks. Nestle seems to have knowingly ignored this and encouraged mothers to use the formula even when they knew the risks. Breastfeeding, one of the most important aspects for an infant, especially in unsanitized areas, was cast aside. Even if mothers understood the need to boil the water, they might not have had the facilities to do so. UNICEF estimates that a formula-fed child living in disease-ridden and unhygienic conditions is between 6 and 25 times more likely to die of diarrhea and 4 times more likely to die of pneumonia than a breastfed child. Another problem was that mothers tended to use less formula than needed to make the jar last longer, resulting in many infants receiving inadequate amounts. But even if the water was boiled, and even if the formula was administered in the right proportion and in the right quantity, it's lacking in many of the nutrients and antibodies that breast milk provides. Breast milk contains the required amount of nutrients essential for neuronal development and to some extent protects the baby from many diseases and potential infections. According to the International Baby Food Action Network, Nestle used unethical methods to promote their infant formula to poor mothers in developing countries. But it gets even worse. IBFan claims that Nestle distributes free formula samples to hospitals and maternity wards. After leaving the hospital, the formula is no longer free, but because the supplementation has interfered with lactation, the family must continue to buy the formula. Nestle denies these allegations, sort of. Let's move on. Few people know it, but Nestle is actually the world's largest producer of bottled water. In fact, they're so keen on this water business that they believe water isn't a universal right. At the Second World Water Forum in 2000, Nestle pushed for making access to drinking water from a right to a need, a defining change. Meanwhile, Nestle drained the aquifers it controlled as much as possible without any regards to sustainable usage or environmental concerns. A recent case is the California drought, an issue without precedent in the past 1,200 years, but Nestle doesn't care. Even as Starbucks recently announced that they would transfer their Ethos water bottling facility from California to Pennsylvania, Nestle CEO Tim Brown said, "Absolutely not. In fact, if I could increase water bottling operations, I would." Yes, if he could, he'd increase water bottling operations, even though Nestle has been working without a permit since 1988. Inhabitat reports that the company has been sourcing its water from the San Bernardino National Forest without a permit and they've been recently bumped to the front of the queue for permit renewal, and they can keep working in the meantime as long as they pay a laughable $524 annual fee. Also, California doesn't know how much water Nestle uses because they have no legal grounds for making the company divulge this information, and Nestle hasn't published any reports. An independent analysis puts all their water usage at 1 billion gallons a year. But when Nestle isn't trying to privatize water or use it without regards to the environment, it's simply bottling tap water. A Chicago-based business has sued the company again, claiming that the 5-gallon jugs of Ice Mountain water they bought were nothing else than tap water. It may come as a shock to you, but nearly half of the bottled water in plastic bottles is actually from a tap, though Nestle never advertised this. And what about the child labor, abuse, and trafficking? Most people love chocolate, but few know the dirty deals behind chocolate production. The 2010 documentary, The Dark Side of Chocolate, brought attention to purchases of cocoa beans from Ivorian plantations that used child slave labor. The children are usually 12 to 15 years old, and some are trafficked from nearby countries, and Nestle is no stranger to this practice. In 2005, the cocoa industry was, for the first time, under the spotlight. The International Labor Rights Fund filed a lawsuit against Nestle on behalf of 3 million children. The suit alleged the children were trafficked to Côte d'Ivoire, forced into slavery, and experienced frequent beatings on a cocoa plantation. In 2010, the U.S. District Court for Central District of California determined corporations cannot be held liable for violations of international law and dismissed the suit, a controversial decision which has since been appealed. But even if Nestle wasn't legally liable for these abuses, they are, at least morally. But that wasn't the only case of this kind. A report by an independent auditor, the Fair Labor Association, says it found, quote, multiple serious violations of the company's own supplier code. It was reported that Nestle hadn't carried out checks against child labor and abuse. Additionally, many injuries caused by machetes, which are used to harvest cocoa pods, have been reported. Nestle's excuse can be summed up broadly as, everybody does it. The health threats. In July 2009, the Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention warned consumers to avoid eating any varieties of pre-packaged Nestle Toll House refrigerated cookie dough due to the risk of contamination with E. coli, a severe foodborne bacterium. In the US, it caused sickness in more than 50 people in 30 states, half of whom required hospitalization. In particular, one woman had a fatal infection before the batch was reclaimed. The company had said in a statement, "The fact that our product was implicated in Linda Rivera's 2009 illness and tragic passing was obviously a grave concern to all of us at Nestle. Since then, we have implemented more stringent testing and inspection of raw materials and finished product to ensure the product meets our high quality standards." And this statement sort of makes you wonder, why weren't stringent testing and inspections implemented in the first place? The debt issue. In 2002, Nestle made what turned out to be a colossal error, demanding that Ethiopia pay them back a debt of US $6 million. There's nothing wrong with that, per se, if Ethiopia wasn't facing extreme famine at the time. For a company that has 29 brands that make over $1 billion a year, asking a famine-stricken country to pay you back $6 million seems questionable to say the least. Nestle's claim dates back to the 1970s when the military regime in Addis Ababa seized the assets of foreign companies. The public roar came almost overnight, with the company receiving 40,000 letters from outraged people in one of the most famous cases of public opinion beating corporate greed. In the end, Nestle took a U-turn, settling for a partial debt, which was also invested in the country's bouncing back from famine. For Nestle, it was a huge moral defeat. For analysts, it was an exciting case which showed that even giants can falter in the face of public opinion. That Nestle is promoting unhealthy food should come as no surprise, but the level at which they operate is simply staggering. A recent report by the UK Consumers Association claims that 7 out of the 15 breakfast cereals with the highest levels of sugar, fat, and salt were Nestle products. CSPI Nutrition Policy Director Margot G. Wooton said, "Nestle claims to be the world's leading nutrition, health, and wellness company, but when it comes to food marketing to kids, Nestle is a laggard, not a leader." Nestle dismissed all responsibility in promoting healthy food. Finally, Nestle has shown time and time again that they have few ethics and little interest in a real social responsibility. From promoting their formula to uneducated African mothers to using water without a permit to exploiting children, they have often gone the extra mile to make an extra profit, even when the extra mile meant hurting people, directly or indirectly. Do they deserve the bad reputation? Absolutely.